And indeed, as mentioned, it is the first time that there is an e-government obligation. Like most of the countries, Greece included, already had e-government services. There was already a possibility to obtain some sort of certificates and do some sort of procedures online, not necessarily for businesses, but for citizens as well. So many countries had that. But the directive introduces an obligation to create such a possibility for the service providers. So this is, if you want, rather new, and the name is the point of single contact, meaning that not just you have to provide them online, this possibility, but it has to be through one portal only, one-stop shop for the service providers to know where to go and to obtain all this information and also fulfill the requirements and procedures. Now, as it was mentioned, the directive does distinguish between establishment and cross-border provision of services and sets different rules for these. And for the establishment, that means everybody who wants to open a business here, Greek or non-Greek, they should have authorization schemes imposed on them only if they are indeed justified and proportionate. And on top of that, the directive also introduces some new principles, saying that these authorizations should be, for example, valid for the entire territory of a country, or indeed the principle of tacit authorization that, again, existed in some member states already. The idea that if you have a deadline set by law by which the public authority should respond to your request and they go beyond that deadline, what happens next? In many member states there was already this rule that means that once you didn't hear from them, you are entitled to pursue your activity. Of course, there are exceptions to this that are mainly indeed for public interest reasons, and the principle as such should be in the national legislation. This is the blacklist of requirements that was mentioned, and just these are some of the examples that were considered to not be acceptable anymore. And in this respect, the directive does not bring anything new. It just codifies the existing case law of the Court of Justice. For example, you cannot have competing operators being involved in whether or not you should be granted an authorization, which seems kind of obvious. And this is the gray list, the requirements that could be maintained, but they still look suspicious enough that they deserve a second look. That's the idea, that you have to analyze them and see if they really are justified by one of the overriding reasons of public interest and if they are proportionate to achieving that scope. And for both for the authorization schemes and for this kind of requirements, member states were under an obligation to screen and also to report to the Commission. So all the authorization scheme and all such requirements that were maintained had to be reported to the Commission. And this is the famous Article 16, which pretty much says that you cannot apply national requirements unless they are non-discriminatory, proportionate, and justified by one of the four reasons mentioned before. This rule that you cannot apply national requirements to incoming service providers does not apply to a long list of exceptions that are different than the ones that are not covered at all by the directive. And these are just a few examples. Which kind of makes sense. These are in general already regulated by European law, so normally you would anyway apply the specific directives in some of the cases. Now, we were talking also about the recipients, and what does the directive bring new for the recipients of services, which are all of us actually. And what the directive brings is that it codifies, first of all, the non-discrimination that existed already, that service recipients should not be discriminated against just because they intend to use the services of a service provider from another member state. And this is an obligation that for the first time is imposed on the private service providers as well, meaning that the directive says not only the member states have an obligation, the competent authorities, not to discriminate based on nationality, that existed, of course, from the beginning of the treaty, right? But also private operators should not discriminate just because I have a different nationality. For example, if I go and rent a car while I'm on holiday, I should not be charged a higher price than the locals are charged when they hire the same car, because that doesn't make sense. But of course, the rental company is a private operator. So before, the private operator did not really have to comply with the non-discriminatory rule. And now they have to, meaning that the national legislation should reflect this principle. This is a really important aspect for the recipients of services. And of course there are some provisions on the assistance of the recipients and what kind of information they should get when you deal with a foreign service provider. So there are a lot of provisions in this respect. And then, of course, we were mentioning the IMI system, or I don't know if we were mentioning, but we were mentioning administrative cooperation. And this IMI system, I suppose the Commission likes acronyms. IMI stands for Internal Market Information System. What it is, it's, if you want, a closed system where all competent authorities from all the member states are registered in, and they can talk to each other in their own language, which is a great help. So practically what they can do is when they have suspicion about a service provider from a different member state that is entitled to provide services in Greece, but one of the certificates they bring just doesn't look right, they can enter the system and send a message. They have this pre-formed, they have these forms that they fill in and say, could you, competent authority from the member state where this provider comes from, tell me more. Tell me if he really exists there, if really this certificate is a valid one. So they have this possibility to work with each other, and this is something quite new, and as you can imagine, it gives a tool to competent authorities to check providers, even if they are, if you want, foreign or only on a temporary basis operating in their member state. The IMI system as such started actually with a different directive, with the one on recognition of professional qualifications. So the bodies dealing with that were already used to working together. But now it's a much larger picture because you have competent authorities from ministries to local authorities in some member states, to chambers of commerce, to let's say the bar associations, so any competent authority in any of the services, in any of the areas covered by the directive have to be in the system and can benefit from it. So this is the IMI system. Now, news about the implementation process. The deadline was December 2009. So member states had 3 years to implement the directive. It was a huge task. We are well aware of it, and we've worked with the member states all through this process. It implies legislative measures and non-legislative measures, like the point of single contact. No, that's a practical tool. It involved all levels of legislation. As Madam Barnard already explained, the UK actually had such an approach at all levels. And some member states had even a tougher job because they have a structure where they have different states, like the federal states, no? Or autonomous regions, or member states where the local authorities have a lot of competence. So it involved a huge amount of work, and we realized this, and these are, of course, the main areas, as mentioned, the screening, the point of single contact, the administrative cooperation. What did the Commission do? All through these 3 years, we tried to help the member states and work together. So we had bilateral meetings. We went to all the member states several times. We met the people that were dealing with this, the teams that implemented this. We had expert workshops in Brussels. We provided materials. We created a handbook on how you should implement the Services Directive. And this is available in all the languages on the Commission's website, on the website of the Internal Market Directorate. And this is very useful if you want. It's more like it's a teaching device that's useful for anyone that's interested in this directive. Now, what happened is that we think that the review of the legislation, the screening, has more or less been completed at the member state level. And what most of the member states did, they adopted one horizontal law, usually a copy-paste of the directive, right, introducing the main principles. And then they also started adopting sectoral legislation, because you adopt the horizontal one, but then you have to actually deal with the veterinarians, and you have to deal with construction, you have to deal with tourism, and it's very difficult to do this through one law, in most cases. So far, we have 23 member states that adopted. I have to say that Ireland adopted, I think, last week.